One doctor stood up to cancer, not because he planned to do so, but because he was ordered to do it. Dr. Emil Freireich's fight against childhood leukemia goes down in history as a key turning point in the fight against cancer. This particular story is special because it was against the most fatal cancer, whose prey was the most vulnerable: children. Once, a leukemia diagnosis was a death sentence. In 1955, less than 1% of children diagnosed with this disease lived through the year, and most died within weeks. It was the worst news a family could receive. Today, Dr. Emil Freireich is 89 years old. I was able to interview him in late 2016 and ask him what it was like to have to treat children with leukemia back then.
That is extremely difficult because you have to deal with the parents, with the child, and with the horror of these 4-year-old children bleeding to death. It's very difficult.
Median lifespan of a child diagnosed with leukemia was 8 weeks. Less than 1% lived a year after the diagnosis. But that wasn't the worst part. Just having a fatal disease and dying at the median age of five, that's not the worst thing. It's how they died. When I started treating these children, we had a ward full of children between the ages of 0 and about 10. And when you came on the ward, all you saw was blood, because these children bled to death.
Leukemia is the most common cancer in children and teens, accounting for more than 33% of those diagnosed. It is unique because there is no tumor to cut out. The cancer cells are found throughout the body from the start of the disease, infesting the blood and marrow. A child might start off with flu-like symptoms and end with a fever that persists. It would come with horrible headaches and pain in joints or bones. The child would get weaker and weaker and would start to have big bruises. They would vomit and be in terrible pain from all the internal bleeding. Today, over 15,000 American children are diagnosed with this disease each year. Survival is not only possible, but 60 to 80% likely. This is because one doctor over 60 years ago was assigned to find a cure.
It wasn't a matter of my choice. I was assigned to do that. And when you're assigned to do a difficult job, you do your best to do the best you can. And I did.
Dr. Emil J. Freireich was born in 1927 and grew up in Chicago, Illinois. As a kid, he had a very rough life. His father died when he was 2, and his mother went to work in a sweatshop, sewing all hours of the day, 7 days a week. As a kid, he roamed the streets. He didn't feel love from anyone. Life was more bitter and hard than good. Once when he was sick, he had a doctor tend to him, and this doctor was the first well-dressed, well-mannered man he'd ever seen. It was then that he started to think he might want to be a doctor. He went to college and after that medical school, graduating in 1949. He went on to specialize in blood research and took a hematology fellowship. Back then, there were no courses that taught anything about cancer.
When did you first realize that you were interested in working with blood diseases in children?
I was forced into that position. I was drafted, and I was assigned to the National Institutes of Health, and they told me this is the project I should work on. It wasn't voluntary.
And when I reported for active duty in the Public Health Service, I said, Dr. Zubrod, I'm reporting for active duty. He said, Freireich, what do you do? I said, I'm a hematologist. So he scratched his head and he said, your job is to cure leukemia. And I'm proud to say that with the help of my friend and lifetime colleague, Emil Freireich III, that we did, in 10 years, cure childhood leukemia.
Leukemia cancer cells basically crowd out and replace normal blood and marrow cells. Normal blood cells and platelets are not able to be produced due to the cancer. Platelets are tiny blood cells that help your body form clots to stop bleeding. When platelet levels drop too low, the patient isn't able to stop bleeding and has just days to live. Dr. Freireich's patients were dying in the worst way possible. It wasn't so much the cancer that was killing them. It was the bleeding.
First of all, we had to work out what was happening to the children. We had to work out a way to stop the bleeding so we could use the drugs to treat the disease. And so the discovery of platelet transfusion controlling bleeding was necessary. That's step one. The second thing is we had to figure out what drugs to give and can we combine them to make them more effective. And then we had to figure out what the strategy was.
Being stupid and inexperienced, I went to the lab and collected blood from the children who were bleeding and took my own blood, put my platelets in their blood, and everything looked okay. So I said, now the next challenge is how to get these platelets from donors to them.
Once Dr. Freireich figured out how to keep the platelet levels up high enough in his patients, he was able to try to start to treat the cancer. Along with his colleague Dr. Emil Frey III, they learned that treating leukemia with any one drug might work at first, but ultimately didn't because the cancer would come back stronger. Dr. Freireich believed that if one drug wasn't killing enough cancer cells, then combining them might increase the number of cells killed. There were only a few drugs that had been used to fight leukemia, and each was highly toxic. No one had ever even thought of combining them. In fact, the common view was that treating leukemia with any toxic drugs at all was cruel since it only made the kids sicker, and they all died anyway. In order to complete his trials, he had to take a stand against the common world view that it was unethical to treat children with multiple highly toxic drugs. He had to go against his own hospital board ruling and the views of many of his peers who refused to help or participate in any way.
So, what was it like and how did you feel when you first saw that your child patients were finally responding to treatment and were getting better instead of getting worse?
Oh, it's very satisfying. It's like any accomplishment. If you tackle a difficult job and you succeed, it gives you two things. It gives you the courage to continue, and the other is it gives you a lot of personal satisfaction.
It was known that physicians didn't last long in the leukemia ward. It was just too hard to work there day after day with all the suffering. The fact that he stayed and remained determined to fulfill his duty of finding a cure is in and of itself miraculous. How did he push through the hardship of seeing the children die every day? What made him tough enough to stay in a job with such high turnover and burnout rates? Dr. Freireich believes that his toughness comes in part from his childhood.
It's hard to know where your adult character comes from. But in my instance, I had a very traumatic childhood. My father died when I was 2. My mother was in a sweatshop. We were in the Depression. We had 10 years of real ugly living. And when you survive that, it gives you a characteristic that you can persist to achieve your goals, and you're tough enough to do it.
In addition, Dr. Emil Freireich had an enormous sense of duty. When pressed on how he got through the difficulties associated with this particular job, he again says that he was just doing what he had to do.
I was in a position where that was my job. I had parents, I had my supervisors, I had my colleagues in the leukemia research, I had the world.
He even felt the entire world needed him to follow through on his mission. So, while a leukemia diagnosis was once a death sentence, now there is hope. Thanks to Dr. Emil Freireich, leukemia is no longer a disease that kills everyone in its path. Rather, it is a disease that can be cured.
I have been very fortunate to be a physician because medicine is man's highest calling. Every day I help people who are in trouble, and that's a wonderful thing.
Emil J. Freireich wanted to help those in need in any way that he could. As a doctor, Freireich had the ability to change someone's fate, whether or not they lived or died. He had the lives of people sitting in the palm of his hand. He knew the impact that he had on each and every patient, on each and every family, on the world.